Never have I ever more wanted to be a homeless peasant. Welcome, Mere Mortalites, to another round of the book reviews. It is your favorite Mere Mortal here, Kyron, with another book review. Indeed, this is the Book Reviews podcast, the Mere Mortals Book Reviews, where we dive deeper into the books that I'm reading to give you the juicy information within, extract some themes you might not have thought about, and also to just understand a little bit more about the classics. I do prefer to focus on the older books on this channel, so things written more than 10 years ago, I suppose, would be my my flavor, but of all genres. And indeed, we do have a little bit of a fun genre today. It is John Steinbeck's Tortilla Flat, which was published in 1935. It's approximately 150 pages in length. I'd say it took me about 4 hours of reading to get through in total. So what is this? Why was my motivation for reading this? What was my initial impression of the book? Well, if you've tuned into the Mere Mortals before, you'll know that I'm a pretty big John Steinbeck fan. His book, The Grapes of Wrath, is definitely in my top 10 of just the best books I've ever read. And I quite enjoyed others such as Cannery Row, such as Of Mice and Men, Sweet Thursday, all pretty decent books. I don't think I've read one where I was like, oh, that wasn't so great. So I consider him a very good author. So every now and then I'll throw in one of his books because he's probably, in terms of the most rock-solid authors that I've read, is right up there. As usual, his books have a pretty rapid intro. They don't need time to develop. And so even just reading this, it's split up into about 17 chapters in total, maybe even a little bit less. And the second chapter, you could probably replace that with the second to last chapter, and that they have a very similar feel. That is just how quickly he introduces characters, gets into the meat of the story, and you get to know these characters very, very quickly. You get to feel, okay, this is what Danny is like. This is like what Pylon is like. And it goes very, very smoothly like that. So initial impression, really, really good. And I guess the plot and style of it, I'll jump into, I guess, what the book is about. So we start off with his character of Danny, and he's basically been away from this place of his birth, Tortilla Flat, or at least where he grew up. And he goes back and he finds out that I believe it's his uncle, has passed away and left him 2 houses. And so whilst he was pretty much a bum, he is now, a fancy homeowner. And so he actually starts to have some troubles with this because he doesn't really know what to do with himself. Thankfully, he has his good friends, and so his good friend Pylon initially joins him in his first house, and then Pylon moves into the second house, and he's a bit worried because might have to pay rent at some point, and Danny's, the funny thing about him is no money will ever be exchanged. There's these friends, they're very intimate, close, known each other for a long time, and so words which would perhaps need to be said in other friendship groups do not need to be. These are just what would you call them, bosom buddies, something like that. And so Danny never asked for the rent because he knows no rent will ever be paid, and Pylon is the same. But they come up with all of these thoughts in their heads about how they can get away with these scenarios. And so Pylon, for example, gets in another friend called Pablo and Jesus Maria, and basically with the acceptance that, these are the two, because I'm now renting to them. If Danny ever asks for the rent, I can say sorry, Danny, Pablo and Jesus Maria, they haven't paid me the rent to be able to pay you. So it's this twisted logic, which is really funny. It's great to see inside their minds, and this is pretty much how the story progresses. Tiny little tales here and there. I mentioned 17 chapters, so each chapter is probably only 5 pages to 8 pages long, something like that. And it develops very quickly, short, sharp stories of them getting into scenarios and trying to find their ways out of it. Long story short, the house accidentally burns down, and so they all move in with Danny, and then the group enlarges again, and they get another guy called the Pirate and one more called Big Joe Portagy. And I suppose what actually happens, I haven't said what happens. Well, it's a combination or one of these things: fights, fire, wine, lovemaking, and stealing. That's basically what all these characters just get up to. So they're all kind of bums. They're all what are called Paisanos, which is I suppose, a mix of Mexican or Latino heritage or Latin American heritage and Native American Indian, I believe is what a paisano is. And they all live in this town of Tortilla Flat, which is in Monterey in California. So think of sunshine, think of nice weather, think of, they all could live out on the streets and have lived out on the streets before, because the weather is just so nice that you can kind of get away with it. You're not going to freeze to death or burn in the desert heat or anything like that. It's a very mild, temperate. The style of the book, I'd say, is there's this kind of elegant contradiction between the humble ridiculousness of the paisanos. They are very small-minded in their thinking. They're in their bubble of Tortilla Flat, and this is all that they think about. They don't have dreams nor aspirations of the larger world, of even, I suppose, what you would call a typical life of, children, a steady job or anything like that. No, they're all kind of just bumming about doing what they want. Yet they have this noble-born speech. They are a lot of dita, the pylon, they, and you can kind of see it right at the start, because I believe even the first couple of words that come out references the tale of Arthur, of King Arthur and his round table. I'm just right. Yeah, here we go. So, for Danny's house was not unlike the round table, and Danny's friends were not unlike the knights of it. And so you can kind of see this is where it's drawing that little bit of inspiration of, even though they are these ridiculous characters and you would expect them to be rather vulgar in their speech and in their slang and things like this. No, throughout the book they have these nice words to say, and I guess it's super evocative. The book it evokes this lazy afternoon style, summer afternoons, drowsy, they're kind of tipsy from wine. There's a lot of wine in this book. That's basically all they care about. And this is what is being described throughout. So I'm going to jump over to page 84 here, where we're first introduced to Jesus Maria. And you can kind of get a feel for the style of the book. And so this chapter is called Chapter 10, How the Friends Solaced a Corporal and in return received a lesson in paternal ethics. Jesus Maria Corcoran was a pathway for the humanities. Suffering he tried to relieve. Sorrow he tried to assuage. Happiness he shared. No hard nor haunted Jesus Maria existed. His heart was free for the use of anyone who had a use for it. His resources and wits were at the disposal of anyone who had less of either them than had Jesus Maria. He it was who carried José de la Nariz 4 miles when José's leg was broken. When Mrs. Palochico lost the goat of her heart, the good goat of milk and cheese, it was Jesus Maria who tracked that goat to Big Joe Portagy and halted the murder and made Big Joe give it back. It was Jesus Maria who once picked Charlie Marsh out of a ditch where he lay in his own filth, a deed which required not only a warm heart, but a strong stomach. So you can kind of see it gives this style. There was no direct speech in there, but their speech is it's very short, sharp to the point, but it has this kind of nobility in it as well. And I think even just in this example here, he it was who carried. I think, normally you'd probably say it was he who carried. But I think just that one little switching of the words to he it was who carried gives this impression of, oh yeah, these are these kind of noble-born paisanos. And that style carries throughout the book, not just in these one-off sentences. It requires I think a deep thinking and a lot of editing and pruning to make sure that this goes throughout. So this gets, I suppose, onto some of the questions and themes once we know what the book is kind of like. All are rather great storytellers, and I think this is probably the main portion that I took from this book. Everyone here had this way of storytelling. Pylon in particular, I think, was perhaps the best. And I'm going to jump over to page 125 here, which was in the chapter of the good life at Danny's house, of a gift of a pig, of the pain of tall Bob, and of the thwarted love of Viejo Ravano. And so in this chapter, they're basically just telling a bunch of stories. It's like a lazy afternoon. They don't really know what to do. I will just tell some stories, and they're trying to outdo one another. And they each kind of take a turn in their storytelling, and we're coming to this point where, who was it that's telling it? I think it was Jesus Maria, I think, was saying this story. And we get to this point here where you must know, said Jesus Maria, at that service station there is a tool house. Early in the morning, the viejo went down and unlocked the tool house and raked the gravel and watered the flowers before the station opened. The other men came to work at 8 o'clock. So one morning, the viejo went into the tool house and put up a rope. And so he's basically going to hang himself to get some sympathy from a woman he's chasing. But he needs to survive. Then he waited until it was 8 o'clock. He saw the men coming. He put the rope around his neck and stepped off a workbench. And just when he did that, the door of the tool shed blew shut. Broad smiles broke out on the faces of the friends. Sometimes they thought life was very humorous. And then he goes on to say how the men missed him. They opened it up and it was like, oh no, it didn't work out for him. He actually hanged himself instead of getting the sympathy that he wanted. And then right at the end here, we have this. Pylon complained, "It is not a good story. There are too many meanings and too many lessons in it. Some of those lessons are opposite. There is not a story to take into your head. It proves nothing. I like it," said Pablo. "I like it because it hasn't any meaning. You can see, and it still does seem to mean something. I can't tell what." And I think that's a good point. Pylon was like getting annoyed at the story that because it's too slow, but I don't think that's the point of a good story. The point of a story isn't so much about the actual delivery. The delivery is what informs the ending of it. So it's you're really focused on the ending. And they mention it many times, like a good story can make you laugh, but also squeeze your heart at the same time. This is what they were talking about with this viejo and a couple of the other characters. They had tragic lives, but there was a moment in it which was, you can't help but laugh at the mirth or the irony of this one particular moment, even though it's squeezing your heart at the same time in pain. And I think that's a great meaning that you can derive from this, and you don't even have to be able to express it or why this is a powerful story or something like this. So I think it's okay to just leave it. That being said, it also helps to be trying clear about what it is that you're experiencing or feeling or why a story is worthwhile. And so this is what I'll try and do with this. I find their carefree attitude in this book super refreshing. So many problems in life are not real, and it is only when confronted with a tragedy, for example, like right at the end of this book, the last chapter is rather tragic, that it does become real. And so there's this thing about this carefree attitude that they all have where, they don't care about going to jail. They don't care if they don't know where their next food is going to come from. If they get a boon of some money, they spend it on wine and they have a good time. And look, I get it. You can't live your life fully like this, but in just what I see in today's modern age, a lot of people get caught up in this hype of like, I've got to do this next thing. I've got to keep working to be able to do this. And this is kind of my mentality and how I think this is expressed in this book is, you've got this imaginary problem in your head, and it's like, I've got to reach X level of wealth to be able to get this person or to be able to sustain a family or something like this. And what we see in this is, even if these guys had real and proper jobs to be able to afford luxuries and to be able to afford things like a suit, to be able to go to the funeral of this tragedy that happens in the book, and were civilized, it wouldn't really ease their grief. They still feel grief at the death of this loved one. And even then, I would say, in fact, they wouldn't have as much grief. They wouldn't be as close to this person because their connection wouldn't have been there, because they would have been working. And so this is where it's like, sure, something really bad at the end happens, and you could say, oh, they didn't prepare for it. They didn't have the civility to be able to go into the church and to be able to do this and do that. But the whole point of it is like, if they weren't just bumming around, having a good time, being friends and forming this close connection, there would have been no reason to buy a suit to be able to do it. So this is where I think I'm not a full on board of, just be a lazy bum and hang around and do whatever you want and things like this. No, I think that's incorrect, and life doesn't tend to work out well like that. This book is very much romanticized about the kind of bum lifestyle, and there's all sorts of real life examples you can see of people who have done this. I believe there was a guy called like Johnny Appleseed or Johnny something who lived out in this bus in the wild in the US, and tried to like live off grid, live off the land, that sort of thing, and froze to death in this bus during a winter. And it's like, damn, that's actually a rather sad story. You know, that what a horrible way to go. Yet it's also not useful to be like imagining all these problems that aren't real. If I just had a job and I could fix this, if I just did this and this would be okay. Neither of those is the correct way to go about it. And a book like this is good at highlighting, hey, there are other ways of living, and you don't have to do the traditional standard thing that everyone is meant to do or that you think is necessarily the best way. So, you know, sometimes problems will just arise and you can deal with them as they arise. There's no need to try and plan and prepare to the nth degree. And that is probably the main thing that I took from this book. So I'll jump onto some just extra details about the author and about this book. I've talked about Steinbeck a lot before, so I won't bore you all with his story and everything that goes on about him. I did just love the character of Pylon. I'm not sure. Most of these characters seem to be based off of real people that either Steinbeck knew or had heard about living in Tortilla Flat. So it does have a bit of a real life connection to the fiction that this book obviously is. And so the character of Pylon is so great. He shows the great resolve to confront an ugly situation. So this is in the burning down of Danny's house. Like, oh shit, you know, my friend left me in charge of this house and we burnt it to the ground. But also cheek and kind of arranging how to fix this, which involves actually stealing a basket and some food and some things to present to Danny and kind of like repentance, please forgive me sort of deal. And it doesn't take much. It's like a couple of bread rolls and like a woman's brassiere. That's all it takes. And he's a master logician, and this is quoted in the book. You know, Danny is the master logician of figuring out how to solve crises, interpersonal crises or problems, and usually it involves drinking a lot of wine, stealing something, or just avoiding the issue entirely. It's so great. I love this character. And so just to give you a hint of kind of how they deal with problems and what sort of problems they deal with, we'll jump onto page 78 here. So basically, Danny is being lost to this lady called Sweets Ramirez, who that he's kind of like fallen in love with, and he's seeing her a lot and love making to her, and his friends are kind of getting jealous. They're like, our friend's being taken away from us, Danny. Like, we need to get him back. And so we come to this portion here. At first, his friends ignored his absence, for it is the right of every man to have these little affairs. But as the weeks went on, and as a rather violent domestic life began to make Danny listless and pale, his friends became convinced that Sweet's gratitude for the sweeping machine was not to Danny's best physical interests. They were jealous of a situation that was holding his attention so long. Pylon and Pablo and Jesus Maria Corcoran in turn assaulted the nest of his affectations during his absence. But Sweets, while she was sensible of the compliment, remained true to the man who had raised her position to such a gratifying level. She tried to keep their friendship for a future time of need, for she knew how fickle fortune is, but she stoutly refused to share with Danny's friends that which was dedicated for the time being to Danny. Wherefore the friends, in despair, organized a group, formed for and dedicated to her destruction. So silly. So basically the whole context of that is Danny gave her a vacuum cleaner, even though there was no electricity to her house, so she couldn't use it. So she pretended to be like vacuuming in this house without having any electricity, which raised her social status in the town. So everyone was now jealous of her. She is appreciative of this, and so is, even though she's rather promiscuous by nature, is now only for Danny's affections for the time being. And Danny's best friends, you know, in best interest of Danny, go to try sleep with his girl, get rejected, and then decide, okay, well, we're just going to bring her down. And so what they end up doing is stealing, as usual. How do you solve this problem? Well, let's just steal the machine and sell it and buy wine. So funny, so good. So yeah, this is the kind of things you'll encounter in this book. It's rather escapism. You get to experience a life that you probably will never live. Like, I'm never going to live like Danny and his friends in Pylon and just just bum around all the time and steal things. For one, I don't have the wit nor the master logician's brain to be able to do this, but it is so fun to see these types of people and know that these types of people do exist in real life as well. Which gets us onto our summary. How would I describe this book? Just witty and fun. It's just a fun book to read. You can't help but love these rogues. You can have your favorites. Pylon is my favorite for sure, and you might have a spot in your heart for the pirate or for Big Joe Portergy or things like this, but there's none of them where you feel any ill intent, despite what their actions on the surface might look like as rather bad. And this is probably the other thing to remember. This is fictional. If you're going around stealing things, getting into fight, being drunk all the time, and living in a house without any electricity, without any, water, steady food supplies, access to money to buy medicines or anything like this, you're probably, this is showing the nicer things of life, not the illnesses, the deprivation, all the hangovers, all of these sorts of things. So it's a reminder of that, but rock solid read, uplifting, despite a kind of sad ending, which was nice as well. Even in the moments of sadness and despair, it was rather fun to read. So all in all, John Steinbeck's Tortilla Flat, I'm going to give a very 7 out of 10 to probably most similar to Cannery Row. If you want another book which is similar to this, The Grapes of Wrath, for example, is much more heavier, and Sweet Thursday was a bit more, I suppose, intellectual. It dealt with a character not as fun, the Doc, who I don't think are as fun as these characters. Mice and Men as well is also, it's kind of like a very shortened version of The Grapes of Wrath, which is rather poetically beautiful, but rather sad at the same time. So that is, I suppose, my summary of this book. Another recommendation: do not read introductions. This is, if you haven't heard this before, introductions I think can absolutely ruin a book. My analogy would be is like having a perfectly fine meal which you're just about to go eat, but you're like, you know what, I could use some licorice beforehand, or just eating something really strong which could just absolutely affect the flavor of this fine meal that you're going to eat afterwards. So in this introduction, for example, by Thomas French, who I'm not sure of his relation to John Steinbeck, there's just a lot of bullshit. There's just a lot of things where it's talking about, this critic said this about the book, and there's a bit of racism in this because he was showing the Paisanos in this light. I thought he showed the Paisanos in an excellent life. I came away from this being like, damn, Paisanos are awesome. so cool. What an amazing culture. What an amazing experience to live through life. Or they focus really on this Arthurian plot line of, even though it was just, a tiny little bit at the start of the book, he then goes on to deconstruct, this, hints back to these things of life, of God, of church, religious matters. I'm just like, dude, it's just a fun book. Like, you don't need to go so hard into this. So I felt it's kind of grasping at straws, because this book was never going to be a masterpiece. It's not going to be something that should be analyzed to the nth degree and elevated to this higher status and draw out all of these themes from and analyze critically and things like that. Even though this is a book reviews channel, I'm not a critic. I'm a fan. I'm an avid book reader. I love them, but goddamn, like you can go too far. So once again, introductions, I would say if you want to read them at the end like I do, and then have a laugh at how silly most of them are, because I've gotten very little value of them from the past, unless it's more of a historical type intro explaining how he built his characters. That portion I found interesting. The other parts, not so much. So yeah, that is the book Tortilla Flat by John Steinbeck. Let's go into the Boostagram Lounge. Thanks some people for supporting the show, and also for contributing some comments, some things which are of interest. So I've only got one supporter today to really highlight, to shout out, to thank, and this being Cole McCormick from the America Plus podcast. He sent through his favorite boosting number, 5,492 sats, and he says, on the book review of Cicero on government, cheers to living in a relative democracy, and then some wine glasses. Yeah, man. Look, government. I don't get too deep into government and politics. It's rather boring, to be honest, and rather futile, I think, as well. But I will say I'm very glad I live in Australia. There's no doubt that whatever we've got going on here seems to be working okay. I know it's not perfect, but it's certainly better than a lot of other places. So I'm very much appreciative of that as well. And my disdain perhaps can only be allowed because I'm living in a place which allows me to have that disdain, and I don't have to think about what I should or shouldn't say because someone in a higher position than me could do bad things to me. So very much thank you for that, Cole. That is a Boostagram. That is something that you can send within your podcasting app, and it will reach directly to me, a message, and it also has some Satoshis attached, a payment of money, to be able to help support the show, because I do have tons of costs in terms of hosting, in terms of my time, in terms of all the equipment I've got going on here. So is very much appreciated if you want to reach out, and there's a couple of links down below as well for a PayPal, which no one has ever used. So if you're the first one to do it, you will have a special place in my Paisano heart. Be still my Paisano heart. And also via Podcasting 2.0 app. If you go to meremortalspodcast.com/support, you'll find out how you can do that. And there's also even if you're new to the whole Bitcoin thing and Lightning Network, I've even got a little introduction of how you can get some of that and send it right back to me. Hopefully, I don't know. That would be really cool. There was one other comment on the YouTube channel that I also wanted to shout out. And so this was from Alza Farsi 8885 a couple of days ago for the Lost Dreams and Lament the Bitter Orange Tree by Joka Al-Hathi. And they say, I'm an Omani literature student, so I read the book in Arabic and English. I can understand that the uncompleted sentences cannot be comprehended sometimes, but these are called fragments that flow through the stream of consciousness, which is a postmodern style of writing. You very much see it in this book. It reflects the human nature of language, especially the multimodal aspect of human interaction. Honestly, I didn't understand that last bit as fully as perhaps I were trying to come across, but what I did take from that book is this style of jumping back and forth rapidly. It is what you would describe a postmodern style that is very much a style in vogue nowadays. And you can see how styles change. John Steinbeck's book, for example, here on Tortilla Flat is very much a short and sharp stories. There's no grand arching plot line. There is no connected. It is very loosely connected, but it is in chronological order, and it does have a rough theme to it. So yeah, interesting. And it's very cool that there's people out there who can read things in English and Arabic and get the differences. I've tried that myself a couple of times as well, comparing books, and it is interesting to see these differences and how things shape out in that respect. So thank you very much. Also enjoy getting comments on the YouTube channel of these book reviews and discussing them as well. So if you want to make it onto the show, hey, please leave a review, and I'm sure I'll discuss it unless I get too many in the future. So we're coming to our end section here, the value for value portion. And this is just my request to everyone listening at home. This is a value for value show. You're never going to see ads on here. You're never going to hear about sponsorships. You're never going to get books which are not books that I want to read, and because I have to read them because I've got an author coming on, or because I'm getting paid behind the scenes to talk about this book or anything. No, none of that. So everything that you hear on here is because I want to read it and because I choose to read it, and that is the main amount of thinking that goes into us, which means there is no money coming in from this from what you would call the traditional sources. So I rely on the value for value model. This essentially means that I just rely on listener support from those of you at home who want to contribute, who have watched this, perhaps gotten value from this in the future. Look, I get it. I've been guilty of this myself. Not even guilty. I have listened to people in the past and gone, you know what? I didn't get that much value from it. It's interesting what they've produced, or maybe I just don't have some money at this time, or I don't know how to contribute or anything like that. I totally understand. This is just another recommendation here, or a reminder here from me to you that there are many ways that you can contribute to this show. The first is just by sharing this with someone else, hitting the like or bell or commenting if you're on a podcasting app, or leaving a rating and review. All of those things do help. They are very much appreciated, and I want to know about it if you've done it, so I can thank you for that. So you can do that with your time, talent. If you know there's particular books that you think I'll read, I always want some book recommendations from people at home, especially based on, oh, Kyron kind of likes Tortilla Flat. He might like this similar book from another author. Yes, please tell me about that. I want to hear that. And I want to hear your thoughts on these books. So this is invaluable. I would never be able to read a book in English and Arabic and to know the differences between the two of them. So I do very much want to hear from you about your experiences reading the book, and anything you can do as suggestions on how to improve this channel, on how to improve the live book reviews and things like that. They're all very, very much appreciated. And then the final one, I mentioned it before, is just some monetary payment to sustain me, to help me keep me going, to pay for costs, because if I don't get support from in a monetary form, eventually the book reviews will have to go away, because I just can't sustain myself from unlike Danny and the Paisanos. I'm not willing to just scrounge around and find little bits of money for wine or for book reviews here and there. I do need to ask for your support in helping keeping this channel running. Very much appreciated everyone who's joined in all the way to the end here. meremortalspodcast.com/support is the best way to learn more about that and all the kind of little benefits that you can get. There's a shirt your way if you support a certain amount. And we'll leave it there for today. A little reminder here that I do these book reviews live at 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, which is UTC midnight. So wherever you are in the world, your time zone, just add or minus that time from there, from midnight, and you'll know what time these are at. They have been on Mondays. I'm switching these to Thursdays from now on, and that's kind of going to be my locked-in position for the next while. So it will be a week and a half until the next book review is released. So just look out for that. And yeah, just very much appreciate you tuning in, joining in, and until the next one, ciao for now. Kyron out.